I know that some intellectual properties and their respective continuities can be pretty confusing at times. For example, with Marvel and DC, there are many alternate universes, reboots, and many writers interpreting the same story in different ways that it can be confusing for new or returning fans to know where to even begin. I know I've already covered this over the years, but Star Wars is different because it is so simple. Before April 2014, the expanded universe, or material that existed outside the 6 main films, such as books, comics, and games, were all for the most part considered canon, unless stated otherwise, meaning 99.9% of all material was considered canon, unless it was some goofy parody story just made for fun or something. When the EU was decanonized and largely discontinued in April 2014, it was rebranded as Legends. The new material coming out now falls under what is currently considered canon by Lucasfilm, also known as Disney canon. So there are now 2 continuities. But apart from the 6 main films and the 2008 Clone Wars show, it was a clean break from the EU. Furthermore, all of the original canon material, like books and comics, are reprinted with the Legends banner to distinguish the continuities even more. That's why I find it odd that people still somehow think parts of the EU fit into the new canon, when they are completely separate universes from each other. Articles like How Star Wars Canon Ruined KOTOR 2, which we'll be going over today, will prove my point exactly. This article is on ScreenRant.com and is written by Sarah Jane Simpson. A link to it will be in the description. Sarah writes, despite being released 18 years ago, Knights of the Old Republic 2: The Sith Lords remains one of the best examples of storytelling in the Star Wars franchise. With its complex characters, plot, and ideas about the Force, KOTOR 2 remains a firm fan favorite. Unfortunately, more recent additions to the Star Wars universe have ruined the legacy that KOTOR 2 and its predecessor, Knights of the Old Republic, built. The Knights of the Old Republic games are considered some of the top-tier Star Wars stories from the entire saga, for the reasons that Sarah just mentioned. But since they are in a different universe, how could recent additions to the canon ruin their legacy? We'll get to that a bit later. Sarah continues, set almost 4,000 years before the main Star Wars saga, KOTOR 2 tells the story of the Exile, a former Jedi Knight as they gather allies and strength to fight 2 of the most powerful Sith Lords in Star Wars. This is a vast oversimplification of an incredibly intricate storyline that delves into what it really means to be good or evil and the Exile's role in the universe. Choices made by the player throughout determine story points, the character's appearance, and even change entire planets. Finally, like all good RPGs, KOTOR 2 featured multiple endings based on those choices to really make players feel immersed in the world. Everything she writes here is accurate. KOTOR 2 is just that good. In fact, I can't believe that there are still EU haters or people that are happy that the EU was discontinued. Are they jealous because we have such awesome games? You do know that it's possible to enjoy new canon and still want the EU to continue as an alternate universe, right? Anyway, Sarah continues. KOTOR 2 was officially decanonized in 2014 when Disney renamed all extended universe content Legends. However, recent new additions to the Star Wars galaxy have gone further to undo established details and the legacy of the well-beloved game. Although the changes to lore are significant, they are not insurmountable. If Lucasfilm ever wanted to bring the KOTOR games into canon, in fact, the trend seen in newer content points to a larger problem within the current Star Wars canon. That's the thing. Lucasfilm doesn't want to bring the KOTOR games into Disney canon. If they did, they would have done it back in 2014. And there is nothing wrong with that. The KOTOR games being part of Legends doesn't mean that they're any less official or valid, even if they're non-canon. All that means is that they're in a separate continuity and not part of Disney canon, which I personally am more than okay with. As I've also said for years, they should come up with their own original stories for Disney canon and stop relying on the EU as a crutch. Sarah continues. George Lucas himself retconned the existence of Force ghosts, the manifestation of a Force user's spirit after death, into the Jedi-only Force spirits, which are now canon. It is now impossible for a dark side Force user, such as a Sith, to become a Force spirit, as the process is directly linked to selflessness and sacrifice. This is shown in the Clone Wars Season 6 episode Sacrifice, when Yoda is confronted by what seems to be the Force ghost of Darth Bane. However, Yoda expresses that he knows this is just an illusion, as Sith cannot be Force spirits. Sith, however, can imprint part of their consciousness onto objects, as shown in the 2017 Darth Vader comic series with Darth Momin, who communicates with Vader via his ancient mask. That's how it worked in the EU as well. Whenever the Jedi became Force spirits, they were one with the Force and at peace with themselves. Darksiders had to imprint their spirit onto an object, or use essence transfer to possess someone else's body, or use a dark side ritual to anchor their soul into the physical plane. That's why you always had Sith worry about death and are constantly trying to find ways to extend their own life. And that's why the last line of the Jedi Code is, "There is no death, there is the Force." In fact, it's actually kind of surprising how little of the EU was retconned by the prequels. The nature of the Force in the afterlife remains quite consistent by several authors, even though they didn't have George Lucas's full perspective on the Force at the time. Sarah continues, "Another change comes in the form of lightsaber crystals, also known as kyber crystals, and how Sith get theirs to turn red. In KOTOR 2, the crystals came in a variety of colors, which would then dictate the color of all lightsaber blades. However, the new canon is that the kyber crystal must be corrupted, a process known as bleeding, in order to turn it red. This was first mentioned in E.K. Johnston's Ahsoka novel before being shown in the 2017 Darth Vader comic series." I know very little about the new canon, but I did know that fundamentally, lightsaber crystals work completely different between Disney canon and Legends when I responded to an article a year ago that was talking about how the KOTOR remake would theoretically have to be changed if it were to fit within the new continuity. I have no problem with lightsaber crystals, or kyber crystals as they are called within the Disney canon, operating differently than they do in the EU. At least it's adding more originality, and not copying the EU again. Though I don't know why a Sith would care about their lightsaber color, or why a crystal would need to be corrupted. Do non-red lightsabers not work for Sith in the new canon? But I digress. This is a big difference between continuities, and further proof that KOTOR is Legends only. Sarah continues, "One of the most significant changes has been made with the recent release of the High Republic novels and the 2014 Tarkin novel by James Luceno. Both Tarkin and the High Republic releases changed what was established in lore concerning hyperspace travel and the Outer Rim. KOTOR 2 sees the player use hyperspace lanes to travel easily around Outer Rim worlds. However, with the new established canon, that would be impossible. In the High Republic novels, the Jedi are exploring and specifically mention that hyperspace beacons were still in use, and that travel around the Outer Rim was dangerous, as it was unmapped. However, much of KOTOR and KOTOR 2 takes place on Outer Rim worlds, thousands of years before the High Republic claimed they were still charting the territories. These technological and territorial changes are huge retcons to what has been accepted canon and alter a great deal of the Old Republic timeline and content. And this was the other difference between the continuities that we talked about with the KOTOR remake. And once again, more evidence that the KOTOR games only fit within the EU. And in the next section of the article, titled, "Star Wars Legends Can Coexist with the Canon," Sarah writes, "As KOTOR 2 takes place almost 4,000 years before any of the Star Wars movies, and even the High Republic, some of the changes can be explained away due to that huge gap within the Star Wars canon timeline. 4,000 years is an incredibly long time, with the Earth's equivalent being the Bronze Age and the construction of Stonehenge. Could technology, star charts, and knowledge about the Force be forgotten in that time? Absolutely. Look, you can believe whatever headcanon you want, or use mental gymnastics to make this work. But the problem with canon mixing is that as more gets established with the new canon, the less room there is to try to squeeze material from Legends in there. It's like trying to fit a puzzle piece where it doesn't belong. No matter how hard you force it, it won't work. For example, I could speculate that Jaina, Jason, Anakin Solo, and Ben Skywalker were all around during the events of the sequels, and no one ever mentioned them. But as more books and comics come out working against that idea, my fan theory probably isn't going to hold up. I know virtually nothing about the Disney canon, but even I know that the KOTOR games can't be a part of it and shouldn't be a part of it. Sarah continues, What has really left many annoyed is that the beloved titles are no longer considered canon, despite little to no conflict in lore. KOTOR and KOTOR 2 contributed an incredible amount to the lore of Star Wars, much of which could still be considered canon. Star Wars The Old Republic still keeps the KOTOR universe alive, but the MMO still draws mixed feelings from fans, making it the less than ideal vessel to carry the KOTOR torch forward. And what annoys me is not the fact that they aren't canon, but that the universe that they were intended to be a part of doesn't have any new material being added to it, outside of the MMO. Speaking of which, I'm a fan of both KOTOR games and the MMO, and SWTOR causing mixed feelings in fans is indeed a conversation that we can have. But you know what would be better for the KOTOR games and the MMO than what you're suggesting? Creating more tie-in Legends material around these games like books and comics, and building upon them. Sarah continues, however, language matters, and the word Legends is a clever choice on the part of Disney and Lucasfilm. Using the term Star Wars Legends for the KOTOR games leaves the interpretation of the content up to the fans. Did the events actually happen, or are they just a story? With both KOTOR games taking place so far removed from the main Star Wars content, even calling them Legends still allows them to be canon in a way. This is just more headcanon and fan theories. And Star Wars Legends being campfire tales within the new canon is one of the most annoying and insulting ways to honor the original EU. This is not like the Star Wars Tales comics, which consist of stories that may or may not have happened. I know it's called Star Wars Legends, but we're talking about an entire continuity, a history of hundreds of books, comics, and games and TV shows that have been carefully constructed into a timeline by many hardworking writers. You want to honor the KOTOR games by having characters in the Disney canon speculate if the events of the games even happened? EU fans want KOTOR and KOTOR 2 to exist separate from the new canon. And lucky for us, that's pretty much how Lucasfilm treats it. Sarah continues, the real problem with Star Wars and its relationship with KOTOR 2 lies more in with the storytelling than with the details. Star Wars canon undermines the complexity and deconstruction of the philosophy surrounding the Force that really made KOTOR 2 stand out. KOTOR 2 wasn't afraid to tell complex stories, whereas more recent additions to Star Wars concerning Force users feel like a massive step back. KOTOR 2 was a game that thoroughly deconstructed many core Star Wars ideas in a way that hasn't been matched since. KOTOR 2 used characters like Kreia to pull apart the concepts of the light and dark sides of the Force, and showed players a different way of viewing both Jedi and Sith. It forced the player to ask deep questions about what it means to be a hero. KOTOR 2 truly dug into why the Jedi mattered and how they were more than just the good guys, but were undoubtedly the heart of the Republic, without which the Republic would fall. KOTOR 2 delved into how they inspired people, which isn't explored thoroughly in canon material now. Star Wars The Last Jedi divided fan opinion with its take on the future of the Jedi, with Luke Skywalker expressing that it was time for the Jedi Order to end once more. This was similar to KOTOR 2, which took the time to explore the idea of whom the Jedi essentially were, and why, or if they were relevant. However, this was utterly undone in Star Wars The Rise of Skywalker, where Force users were again reduced to Jedi good, Sith bad. I am not a canon hater, nor do I want to be accused of being one, but comparing the sequel trilogy to KOTOR, that's rough. Maybe KOTOR is better off existing in a continuity that remains untainted by J.J. Abrams. Just saying. Sarah concludes by saying, this simplistic view undermines and devalues all the hard work done by teams like KOTOR 2's Obsidian Entertainment and the defunct lore created by such games. By ignoring KOTOR 2 and relegating it to Legends, rather than incorporating it into canon, future Star Wars content cannot benefit from the depth provided by its characters and story. This lessens the universe irreparably if the deeper questions are ignored in favor of more fan service cameos and action sequences. KOTOR 2 is better than most remember, and was a brilliant piece of storytelling that could serve as inspiration for more nuanced narratives for future Star Wars content. Modern Star Wars hasn't ruined KOTOR 2 due to details being changed or lore being rewritten. Knights of the Old Republic 2 feels ruined because its mark left on Star Wars feels as though it's utterly meaningless now, as its contributions to lore via philosophy are ignored. The way you talk about it sounds like the new canon needs KOTOR 2 a lot more than KOTOR 2 needs it. KOTOR 2 being relegated to Legends is a great thing. It's a fantastic thing. Incorporating it into the new canon would reduce this fantastic story with complex plot, characters, and ideas of the Force into hearsay within the new canon, and it would lead to a bunch of contradictions within the new canon that weren't there before. But I will agree with you on one of your most important points. KOTOR 2 is being ignored by Lucasfilm, as is the rest of Star Wars Legends. But it doesn't have to be. Not by being lazily forced into Disney canon, but by living on in the original continuity that it was intended to be a part of. Continue Legends. Continue the storyline of KOTOR 2 so it doesn't feel like it's being ignored. And continue the new canon so it can grow and thrive and maybe even achieve the high standards of the expanding universe created by these games. But what do you all think? Let me know in the comments below.